that we have is, this is from Mark Wilt. And Mark, what I'm understanding is you're looking at dome venting at the top and the bottom, or asking about dome venting at the top and the bottom of the cupola. And we have that. Reinke shakes is what you were looking at building with. And Reinke shakes are an aluminum shake. I brought some samples of them. They're basically a piece of aluminum that's got ribs in it. I'm going to hold it to you sideways so you can see there's very narrow ribs in there. There's a surface painted on one side, it's a Kynar finish. We did a test for them that's Energy Star rated. So there's a color. This is the white. This is a reddish brown. And this is a green that they've got. Holding it up to a light to kind of let you see the reflection of it. It's more expensive than asphalt shingles, but it's forever. Asphalt shingles that we use are the Malarkey brand, noisy shingles. It's the Malarkey brand, and that's a 50-year shingle, Malarkey Legacy. Legacy is the model number. We ventilate the dome in certain climates, and there are certainly some differences in different parts of the country from a ventilation standpoint. Carrie, you can throw that map up. Might be catching you off guard here, but we got a map of there's 7 different zones in the US. And with that, we change the dome in different areas as far as venting or non-venting. So you can see on this map, Mark is out in Pennsylvania. So it depends on what part of Pennsylvania. Most of it's in zone 5A. We are located in Minnesota, right on the border of 6A and 7A. And the A and the B with that black line that runs sort of down the middle vertically of the states, the A zone is moist. We have a moist climate. The B zone is dry. Now, I should say to you, and there's a line that you see here, which is really a page that I taped together, and one page was lighter than the other. But it sort of shows what's happened over the last 10 years. The line, the dry line has moved east, almost to where that shaded line is. It's about 150 miles. That's the movement that we've had from dry to wet. So the same thing with these zones. This map, I know, is got to be 15 years old, 20 years old maybe. But it's still being used, still hasn't been changed. But when I look at it, I tend to move those lines north because that's what's happening. We're not getting as heavy of a winter as we normally would. So there's some reasons why California is so dry. So all of this relates to what do we do in those different zones. Our big thing way back in the 80s is we solved the issue with condensation by ventilating our domes. We take air in at the bottom of the dome with a special vent skirt that goes around that dome. And there's air intakes at that point. And at the top of this dome, there is either, if you don't have a view cupola on top, you have what we call our vent cupola on top. It's a cover that goes over the top of the dome. So do we want to ventilate domes down in zone 3A? No, we don't. And especially 2A, and what you don't see is the very southern tip of Florida, which is 1. It's Dade County where Miami is. Those are very moist climates. We don't want to take air in that's moist and run it through the insulation and then try to ventilate it out. It also relates to vapor barriers. Air barriers, vapor barriers, water barriers, they're different. So all of this discussion really revolves around where do you live? And then another part of it is how do you live? How do you live? Do you turn that air conditioning on and you live with that for most of the summer? That's going to create some other issues. And with that, you need a special kind of vapor barrier. So it's all those things that relate to that. We're going to have the other part of this question that Mark had was, how do you calculate what is needed for either heating or cooling? And then that relates to this area here. Where are you living? His question also was, is there a dome calculator? He sees heat loss calculations for conventional housing, but he doesn't see one for domes. There is one. Basically, we created this from the longhand, I'll call it the long version of Minnesota's heat loss calculation back from the 80s and have carried it through. So that's where you're going to have about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours of dealing with all of these charts and maps. This is part of the International Residential Code that you're looking at on the screen right now. It shows what the ceiling R value is required right now in these different zones. What we use is we add 11 to that R value. Where were we in 73? How much insulation did we require? And along came the oil crisis and things changed. So we were ahead of that when we started out. We said, oh, we got to create more insulation. We got to get a thicker wall. So in the 80s, we created very thick walls. We went to 12-inch walls and 15-inch walls. And then they changed it again. So we went to 18-inch thick walls in some areas, a lot of areas, as our basis. And we're looking for, and in that most of your zones, 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, 8's up in Alaska, it's an R60. That's what we're looking for. That's what you want to stay ahead of. You want to stay ahead of the curve here. If you design and build your house to meet these requirements, and you'll hear me, some of you heard me say, if you've been with me before talking to me, you just built the worst house you can build because you followed the code. And that's what it is. The code is a minimum, and you want to be above that minimum. You want to stay above that minimum. You want to bank on the future, not the past. So that's where it'll say an R30 down in Miami-Dade County, or go into Texas and the whole southern part of the southern states, and you're at R38. We say you should be at R49 in those bottom states, those southern states. The rest of the country should be at an R60. There's other issues that pertain to this. It's the air tightness in the house. Sort of gets into a long discussion that I'm going to cut off kind of to get into our other questions. But the calculation that we do is we have to look at, slide that up a little bit, Carrie, and you can see the chart on the bottom. It lists the U value. And the U value is the inverse of the R value. So it's 1 divided by R gives you the U value. And that's just another way that they're rating these things. The higher the R value, the better it is at resistance to heat transfer. The U value is the inverse of that. You want a lower number. The big thing that you have noticed if you bought windows, there's a U value that's on your windows. That's the most common thing that you see, but everything has a U value and an R value. So we're looking at what do you have that's making up that dome. We've gone to a lot more hybrid insulation systems where we use foam insulation and fiberglass. And with that, we can do a little bit thinner wall or get more R value in that same thickness, 12-inch, 15-inch, and go to 18-inch if you're really looking at getting an R70 or R75. That's the hybrid system. We can get to that very easily. So we need to know how you're building it, where you're building it, what materials are you using, all these things that are into this thing. And it'll vary. I know later on there's another question relating to insulation and how much insulation should you have and what's the difference when you add insulation. With our system, we have a 12-inch thick wall, 15-inch, 18-inch, 21-inch thick wall. There's no additional cost in the structure to do that thicker wall. What it is there's a plywood gusset. I know, I just realized my prop here is not here right now. So that other question that relates to it is how do you get this insulation level up to where you should be? So it just adds more insulation. Insulation's fairly cheap, easy to do. So we just make a thicker wall, no cost in the structure, and it's just the insulation cost.
Right.
Mark, is that kind of what you wanted to know? The law?
Yeah. Yeah.